Good morning, YouTube folks. This is Pops with some ideas on your Alice Charmers and some other tractors that start a little hard. The older Olivers, Case, cold weather starting for some of these tractors. The Alice Charmers is right up into the Harvey engines was a problem. Not a critical problem of the Harvey engines, but it was a problem. Why? They kept their compression low for turbo. Too low. 14 and a half to 1 was low. At the time, it wasn't out of sight low, but it was low. They completely changed the 6000 series when they went to 15 and a half to 1 compression ratio. Yeah, go up 1 full mark, and it was a totally different tractor. But they took a little bit off that torque rise. Not a lot, but a little. Just enough some people noticed, but they loved the starting, so it didn't matter. Some of the things to look at with the older engines. Alright, let's start first with, well, it goes all the way back. Minneapolis Moline Olivers with the Waukesha's, the Case engines and the 30 series, not the 70s, but the 30 series. And before, Ford, for some reason, ignored that. And Deere ignored this. It's called the Lenova system, or what we over here in the U.S. know as the powercell. There's another name for it, but I can't remember right now. But those are the two main ones. We call it powercell here. Why? Well, the idea is there's a cell here, sometimes a double cell, and on the other side's an injector. Now, the difference with the injector, if you put two side by side, direct injection and a power cell, the direct injected has a point to it and holes around it. And usually the plane of the holes is at an angle, as well as spraying at an angle, downward and in, kind of like taking your hand and trying to make the final ends of the spray parallel to go into a combustion bowl in the piston. The power cell engine has a flat top piston, almost 100%, but not every one. But we're talking power cell. We are not talking pre-combustion chambers, okay? We're not talking direct injection, power cell. Okay, now the injector is a flat nose with a little teeny tiny tip in the middle of it that's critical. That little tip is critical. If it's not there, it doesn't work right. Period. End of story. Okay, now, and the other part too is the cone sticks out for a reason, because when that nozzle tip pops, what happens is, as all other poppet nozzles, the valve comes inward. But that little cone tip is sticking out. So as it comes in, the spray comes out, hits the cone, spreads. But because it's so small compared to the rest of the hole, most of the fuel goes over it, but at a large oval. And it atomizes it a little more. Outside of that, of course, you're going to get a general fine spray in the combustion chamber. What the idea is to have essentially a double cone. Spray goes out, fine spray in the combustion chamber, hopefully light enough and fine enough to start a fire. The rest of it goes all the way across and into, and you'll see it in the head, a funnel. Goes all the way to the back if everything is aimed and working correctly, hits the big cell in the back and starts burning. From the combustion chamber, the flame goes all the way, it starts, goes all the way across, spins around in here, and even if it doesn't fire in here, which quite often it may not, especially in cold weather, it'll send it out with such a fervor that it'll go out into the combustion chamber. And the idea is a long, slow burn. Most of these engines didn't turn over 1800 RPM, maybe 2000. Why? Slow burn. All of your atomization is done off the injector, and the swirl is done in the power cell. And the combustion chamber, you'll notice, is the exhaust valve was almost, on all of them, the exhaust valve is high and the intake low. And it'll spray right across. Why? The exhaust side is the hottest part of the chamber usually, especially after it's running. So they're hoping for a clean burn. But they need room for that event to occur in the head, hence the flat top piston. So the combustion chamber, everything's in the head. What's the problem? That's right, it's where all the heat is, and almost every single head on all of these tractors after thousands of hours ends up cracked between the valve seats. And often around the power cell or the injector. What's some of the problems they have with starting? Well, most of these need a tool, and it's miserable. And quite often you don't even bother to do it. You hope that you've kept clean fuel in these things and kept them burning well. These tractors hate low load, low speed. Well, yeah, if you're way too slow. They're already a slow operating engine, yes. But if you low load, no heat, low speed, you start having trouble. Then you go out in the spring and plow. They plow great, they run great, but there's buildup in there and it's burning. And it heats up that system. What can you do with these things? One of them is, obviously, make sure your fuel system is flowing well. Make sure your pump is working well. But there's usually in the owner's manual so many thousand hours or hundreds of hours, whatever, that you take your manifold off and you pull the little, there's a nut on the other side, outside of the head. And some of them have a crossbar holding it in there instead of a nut, but you take all that out, clean it out. Even if all you do is take the end cap out and you can see the bore in there with a wire brush, clean it out. And you want to be careful here. You want to put a wall or a board or something up, but just if you can crank it, gently hand turn the engine over so when the piston comes up it blows any excess carbon out. Yeah, you're going to hit the starter and crank it. Yeah, you want to bump start, put a board up. It's rare, but that hole in that funnel is quite small. The funnel itself is usually in the neighborhood of 3/4 of an inch. The center hole in that funnel, not so big. Usually in the neighborhood of 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch. The idea, well, if the injector isn't spraying perfect, it hits in there and it'll guide it into the hole, which is part of the problem. I'll get to that in a minute. So you got your power cell caps off. My uncle did this once, and if you do it early enough, now you're going to hear all kinds of different things to do. Some will tell you to clean it up, put it back in, and don't put anything on it. Well, if nothing leaks, that's good. It can work. Most will tell you put some Never Seez on it. Why? No. If Never Seez gets on the face, it actually has nickel or something else in there to help seal it. But you want to keep it away from the face. You want both faces, internal and outside, clean. Some of these have a tool that will screw into the inner part, and you can pull that out if you've done it soon enough, either from a complete head job or for the tractor being new or you've done it regular along, that you can pull that out, clean it all up, and put it back in. A clean power cell means a clean sweep of fuel in, fire, and out. And they'll keep themselves relatively clean. I haven't seen too many dirty over the years. And I did engine work with diesels in a engine. I keep saying small. It's not a, how can I say it? In a one-horse operation, yes, I did small engines, but it was a small shop for engine repair. It wasn't a small engine shop. And I get a bunch of diesel heads through my shop over the about 8-9 years that I was in business until the ex took care of that problem in her life, so she thought. And not many of them were all that dirty, but they were always stuck. There were some of them you actually had to have the head off, the injector out, and reach a rod all the way through to start tapping that thing out. Well, if you do too much damage doing that, yeah, you start to get my point here. There's a lot of damage you can cause to make the situation worse. The ideal thing that I've done before on these is if you're able to take it all out, clean it out. And I never seized them. A lot of people will tell you don't, but I did never seize them. And put them back in. I don't care if it's nickel or copper. Take your pick. Copper's supposedly better. Jury's out on that. And get it all cleaned up. But especially the faces. There's two ways to go about this. One of them is have a platen sander that you know is a flat platen. Okay? Because there's almost no way to actually tell on these things. You'll say, a piece of glass. Well, glass flexes to whatever the shape of the surface is you're working on. Now, if you want to be a purist about this, you get a nice thick 1/2 inch, 3/4 plate of steel. Nice big one, probably neighborhood of 6 inches square. Heavy. And you'll put a 120 piece, 120, 180, 200, 320. But I would start with slightly coarser, probably in the neighborhood of 120, 150, 180. Just gently slide it over. Now, for me, it's not direct. That sandpaper I'm putting on that plate, I find a sharp edge either on the plate or a piece of angle iron or whatever, and slide that face, that's right, slide that face right across it. What's that do? Any abrasive that's going to break off when you're working, it takes off the harsh, sharp edges. And it'll take 120 grit and have it operate like 150. But because you broke the surfaces off already, you have a solid surface to work with your tiny little, because these things are soft. PowerCell material is very soft. Don't tell me it isn't. I've done 100, 200 of these things over the years. It is soft. So you need to be careful. You take that and you're, what, start finer? You could. You'll have the same problem. Follow me. You take that paper and run it across that edge. Put your hand on the paper, run it across the edge, and do it again so the whole paper has been turned and run over the edge. Then you're going to see little pieces hit the ground. Why? You're taking the high, sharp edges off, the easily fractured, the brittle stuff off the top. Excuse me. And now what do you have? A base. A solid base that you'll get some, but not much. What happens? Some of these actually are released from the bonding material. So you get a big crystal up in there, and you skid that thing over there, and what have you got? That's right. You got a huge gouge. And now you're going to end up taking off, yeah, you want a nice, smooth surface. Why start with 120? Well, if you rake it off, your 120 will start to act like 150 or 180. Well, why not just, I just explained it to you. You're cleaning off the harsh edges that even a finer grade would have a problem with. Okay? You hear me? Follow me? So, if you think there's a problem, you've got a nice flat plate that somebody has, you've taken to a machine shop, 6x6. They machined it all off perfectly flat and smooth, right? Or a thick piece of glass you know is flat. You get a big old square. That's right, a check square. Check with your feeler gauge. You want a thousandths. No more than a thousandths difference. If you can get it clear through there, beautiful. So now you've got your 120 and you just start cleaning. Why 120? The other one is if there's been leaks, it's easier to have a little more coarse to take the carbon off than not. Now you go to your one from 120 or 150. Now you're going to your 180 or your 200s, 220s. You're getting close now, but still, rake it over the edge one more time. When you start getting to your 240s and your 320s, you're into a whole different kind of paper, and it is far more, it's smaller, bonded better, and you're going to be okay. So, but always light pressure. Unless you found a gouge that you have to take out, it's light pressure, and you're going to do a figure 8. You're going to start here and either pull and go up and around, or you're going to start here and push and go up and around. Then you're going to stop every 3 or 4 strokes, turn it 90 degrees. Do it again. Light pressure, if any. Then you're going to turn it 60 degrees. Turn it 90 or 120. That's right. You're going to do it in all sorts. Why? Because that 1 or 2, you know that it's 1/1000ths. It might actually be 2 because that little ribbon is quite wide. And you may only have 1/1000ths and a half. That won't go under. That's all you got. And if it's off, that 1 or 2/1000ths, if you keep turning it, you'll end up with a pretty flat surface anyway. Because every single surface is going to hit in a different area all the way around. Trust me on this. Now some of you are going to say a file. When I've been desperate on the road, I've actually used a file, but the file always ends up narrower. And you don't have a choice. You slide it back and forth, turn it, slide it back and forth. And you have to have it on a flat surface because just like that glass, it's going to flex. Trust me on this. And quite often, files that are improperly heat treated, and you'll never know it because it's designed to cut, not necessarily be perfectly flat. And how you manipulate that can cause a lot of trouble. That's why I say on all these things, light pressure. Don't force anything. And I have done it with a file and come out fairly well. How do I know? Because I put the 2 surfaces together, and one of the ways you know, if you got it out anyway, you put a little, just a tiny drop of oil, even penetrating oil on the surfaces, stick them together, move them around, and they will almost hold themselves together just with that oil film. Now, penetrating oil isn't going to hold, but you'll feel it. Regular motor oil, your 1540s and such, just a little light and make a film all the way around, it'll just about hold itself hanging upside down. Then you know you've got a good, clean, flat surface. So some of you are going to say, well, if I put never sees in there, that has particles. True story. So I try and keep it off the face. But if it does get on the face and there's no way you can avoid it, make sure it's all moderately smeared, not thick, just nice and covered. So when it goes together, there's enough pieces there to assist in the seal, because that nickel or copper will smear. It's designed to. Okay, so if you're a purist, you got the injector out, you poked both sections of it out, or used the proper tool and pulled it out, cleaned everything up, you're in pretty good shape. Now, again, you may not be able to reach across with a tool to pop the inner part out. The inner part with a cone is quite long. You're talking in the neighborhood of 2.5, 3 inches long. Then the outer cup's just a little guy. But to get that out, sometimes you may be able to go through the injector hole, through the funnel nozzle, and tap the back side out and do some of your cleaning that way. And again, don't scratch that surface that mates. Your injector has a mating area that has no gasket. No gasket material, nothing. It's tool steel on tool steel, and they never leak, do they? And I have cleaned some of those up on files as well, but with something like 320 paper on a file on a relatively flat surface, and turned a lot. So there are ways that work, but it's ugly. Without skill and years of experience, don't. I'd be sketchy doing it now, except out in the shop. I have a plate that I purposely flattened to grind off the top of an 8N block because a guy couldn't afford to machine it. I said, I've got an alternative for you. He got itchy, and a week before I could get there, just threw the engine together. No! He says, it'll blow a gasket. We'll do it next time. I wanted to do it before he put the sleeves in. So I do have a flat plate from a platen sander that has been tested to make a flat surface. In fact, this platen sander, I had 3 customers in the past that specifically, if they needed something machined off the head, they'd take it someplace because I didn't have a Bridgeport or anything else to do the head machining with. And then they would bring the head to me to do a final sanding. Why? Because if you set your cutter head wrong, you've got 2/1000ths low where the head gasket blows between the cylinders. The platen sander, if it's in good condition, tested and working properly and handled properly, is less than 1/1000th. Now, guys out here have shown where platen sanding has multiple areas. They are correct. I'm not here to argue with them. Now, if you go to Steve Morris Engines, he'll even show you the 1/1000th to 1/1000th and a half dip. And in the racing engines with the copper gaskets and such that he has, but he has fire rings where even 2/1000ths isn't going to bother because it bites into the copper into the head. So he's already made his engine is not built to handle the big 2/1000 swath problem, the dip. His engine's built to take the power that it's putting out, period. And 1 to 2/1000ths in that area is not going to do a thing, and he will show you that it's approximately, if it's adjusted correctly and you take light passes, it is 1/1000th dip consistently. And an aluminum head with what he's running and the torque on those heads, 1/1000ths is squat. So I'm not arguing with anything. Either Dave's Automotive or Steve Morris Engines or some of these other guys. Who's the one there? What's his name there? The rehab guy. Another one. I'm not here to argue with any one of them. Everything that some of these guys tell you is absolutely true. And I'm a platen sander guy. I love my platen sander. It does an excellent job. It has to be checked continuously. It has to be handled continuously, properly. It's not something that just drop it on there and hand it to the customer. Now, in years past, I could do that because I got a technique that told me that I could do that. But I would test it every so many heads. And you say, well, that's not Well, I had several customers that they would take the head back and they checked my work, especially guys with aluminum heads. Automotive, where the bolts are small and the fire rings aren't so good and the blocks aren't so great. But they said if I start with a flat head, I can tell the customer there's another 50,000 miles on that engine. So I got to work. So platen sanders can be better than that machine surface. Here, like I said, what the other guys tell you is absolutely accurate. There is no argument here that a platen sander can screw things up horribly, especially on aluminum heads and racing stuff, if it's handled wrong. Okay? I can take an aluminum head with the wrong belt on here, handled wrong, and I can destroy that beautiful flat plane that they have on there, and the head won't be here, the head will be here. Or the head will be here. Destroy all of their geometry. So I'm not here to argue their point at all. They are all absolutely correct. But when I'm working with cast iron out here, and carefully with aluminum, and I've done a lot of aluminum heads with overhead cams and such, that you don't just bring the head in and sand them a flat head and hand it to them. I had several heads that I had to build a jig and actually jack the head so the cam turned free. Then I sat there on the platen sander and took care of any other twists or whatever else, gave them a flat surface for their gasket. One engine had 200,000 miles, and when I got done, I had another 50,000 on it before the second year was up running beautifully. When we took that head off, that cam could not turn without a wrench. So I did what somebody had done with some of the Ford engines to avoid cracks in the top of their heads on the 2.9s. And I thought, let's adapt that to the cam. And with aluminum head and a new head bolts, the problem was gone. We bolted that on there. So if the head was actually twisted still, which it could be mildly, not moderately or heavily, put it back on there, and we had a cam that turned so free it would scare you compared to the one that was bound. But there again, everything they're telling you is true, because what I did was a technique, a manual technique that took tremendous amounts of time, and we had to check it. And it worked. So when I had to check it, when I put my jig on, I had to check it before, and then check it after, and then double check it on the machine, the engine. 2200 Toyota. 300,000 miles in the end result, I heard. So it can be done, but I'm going into this to tell you that there's a lot of stuff you can do that somebody else is going to tell you is insane. Take your time. Those power cells can be cleaned up and put back in. The platen sanders, they can be used as a flat surface even. The one I don't recommend, and it probably would still work, no, don't. You're going to go into your belt and your disc sander and say, I'll just go. No. No, 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 no. No, no, no. Not unless you can put a 240 belt on there and you have a bar, check bar. You take the belt off and you take that platen sanding belt surface and you check it. And you know it's a thousandths. Then put your belt on. And now gently run it over. But your belt, you know what you're going to do? You're going to fire that thing up and run a piece of steel all the way across it. I wouldn't recommend a file, but just enough to take the high edges off. Clean the belt out, and then you can hand lap. Yes, 10W30 motor oil, SA30, 15W40. Always use some motor oil. Always use some motor oil. Grind it off. Colder the weather, lighter the oil. But always use something that just nice, clean surface. Why? Oil does something funny that other things don't. Even kerosene to some extent, but kerosene's a little too thin. Diesel fuel on up, because it's like an oil, will actually carry metal particles. So if you're cleaning the surface off, that means you're taking metal off, and it'll carry out in the oil. And then it can act as a secondary abrasive as well, because hopefully, if you haven't pressed too hard, they're very fine particles, and it'll carry, and you'll see the color of the oil change. You'll clean it off, and in that case, on a belt sander, turn it to another surface by hand, unplugged, and then do some more cleaning. Make sure your surfaces are clean, front, back, and inside the head, perfectly clean, blown out, And now you can reinstall them, and your injector on the other side as well. Now your injector, this is a beautiful thing. All your surface is nice and clean. Your injector's been pop tested. These things pop test anywhere between 12 and 2,000 psi. Most of them are in the 15 to 1,800 pound range. Why? Because they don't need high pressure as much. All they want to do is deliver the fuel across the chamber, start a fog fire in here, send it into the power cell, and hopefully catch a little on fire, turn around and send the flame back out. So it's everything all clean. You know the tip hasn't been touched with anything except maybe a brass brush to make sure the tip is clean. I do not recommend stainless. It can work if it's desperately, but if it's that bad, change the tip and set your pressure. How do I do that? Well, it's up to you. But I've done some of them in the past with pre-combustion chambers and power cells where you just clean everything up, take the tip off, clean everything up again, put the new tip on, and run it. Dimensions are less than half a thousandths difference. You're into the 10,000ths. So whatever your pressure was, it is now. And if you suspect that there's a burning problem because your power cell's all fogged up and your injector's fogged up and the holes are all crusty, then you aren't even putting the tip on. You know it has to have the pressure. You know, A, you had a bad tip. B, you probably should have a pressure tested. So then, if you need one, do them all. Get them in that pressure range. Why? Because that spray coming out of there at that pressure is important. And you say, well, yeah, but no, it starts harder. No, it's possible. What do you mean? Well, your pressure is going to back off a little. You raise it up to where it belongs so it'll spray well and your power cell engine will start better. Your injection pump may be worn enough that you have to, you're getting into money. You want it to start or not? That's all I'm telling you. Power-wise plowing, you'll probably notice very little difference except a lot cleaner smoke. You'll be able to throttle back a little bit and still work it and lug it. It'll make a difference in how much fuel you burn. It can pay for itself, all of this. But let's forget the pump for a minute. You're putting your injector in. Catch a new little copper washer in there. You might have put a little bit of grease or never sees on it to hold it in place. Slide that puppy in there. Most of these have studs. Studs, you clean the studs up, right? The hole's clean, studs are clean. New nuts or clean nuts, chase threads in them. New washers on them, you know, clean washers at least. You run the nuts up and down, you know those studs are perfect. A little bit of lube on them, never sees in my case. And you tighten them down with a nut driver. You heard me correct. You push it in with your fingers, hold it, and you'll feel it. It'll rock. The instant you feel pressure of any kind, stop. Do the same over here. Take the nut driver, take your fingers off, turn the nut driver just a little. Turn the nut driver just a little. Now you're relatively even, aren't you? And you're going to take your torque wrench and go back and forth in 2-pound increments, 2 to 5 pounds. But you're only putting in maybe 25 pounds of pressure. So you start out with 2-pound increments until you get up near 10. But I'd still go in 2-pound increments. Why? Because you want to get it so that the final torque between the two is exactly the same. Because you're doing this to it each time. And the closer you can get that puppy down to exactly perfectly straight means that spray across to that power cell is a cleaner spray into that power cell. And you will notice a difference. In fact, Edgar Handy taught me years ago, and I saw there are two descriptions here I'll give you on that torquing. Edgar Handy taught me what he had done before was, and we can modify this slightly. You start your engine up and take it for a hard, and everything looks good. Take it for a nice hard run and check your temperatures all along the exhaust manifold at the mount, the flange, and see if one's off a little bit compared to the others. And what Edgar liked to do was wind it all the way to the top and watch the smoke. And what he would do is tighten one side down a little bit, no change, bring it back. Mark the nuts all the way down through. Then he'd take the other one, tighten it, see if it clears up. He showed me on several tractors where, now this was mainly when nothing was cleaned out. We just swapped injectors, never touched a power cell. And we would change the torque within a couple of pounds, that 2 pounds, just enough that you could actually see the smoke clear up because it was aiming across the head more in line. Now, the other one that goes along with that was a direct injected, I think, 2805 Massey Ferguson, and I was at the service school with a guy that they overhauled the engine when he found out what the problem was. The engine was dusted. They rebuilt it, and Massey covered it for some stupid reason. And when he got done, he showed him something. He was a torque wrench fanatic. I mean, we're talking an alien about torque wrenches. The tin was torqued on this machine when he got done. It was absurd. However, he said, watch this. And I went up and saw the dyno. Those are 100 and, I'm just going to throw some numbers out there to give the example because it was this close. It was rated 195 horse and it was putting out around 200 after it got some runtime in it. And he says, I want to show you something. 200, 205. And he says, watch this. He walked up front, he took a ratchet, and he tightened down one nut. Just a little bit. And then went back. And it lost 5 horsepower and so many foot-pounds of torque. And he said he went back and turned it back to where it belonged. He went back and looked at it again, and it all came right on back. All it was one bolt over-torqued, or one stud on the injectors, because these are old buggers. Had the ears and the studs. It was over-torqued. Now, it was insane, because he should have pulled the injector and put another copper washer in there, some of you were thinking. Yes. But at the same time, once it went back to level, the washer will take care of itself. It's a new engine, under load and under heat, wasn't leaking. Just let it pound itself in, it'll be okay. And it was. But that was his story for the use of a torque wrench everywhere. Well, injectors in particular that have the 2-bolt systems. That's why you'll see a vast majority of injectors from right around 1975 on up no longer have that. They have forks on them. Why? So the thing will go down and it'll float and set itself straight, according to the mating surfaces. And that those 2 little fingers with the little balls on the end, just hold it there. Now, you're talking about pencil nozzles, that's a different story. That's just junk. But what we're talking about is a full-bodied, pintle-style, power cell injection nozzle all the way across. When everything's all cleaned up, your pressures are set right, your injection pump's working well, filter, good fuel, working through, those systems work very well. Another one I would recommend highly on those older systems, they were designed for a lot of sulfur and a lot of ash in the fuel, specifically ash in the oil. Engine oil, but they had sulfur and other stuff in the fuel to keep it solvent. And assist with the lubrication to keep the paraffin, like I said, keep it solvent, but the paraffin thin, that was your lubrication factor. A lot of the stuff now doesn't have that in it. So fuel additives on these old girls, I would say every tank. I'd fill up my bulk tank with it if you're running a lot of these old girls. Not necessarily the new tractors, no. So if you're running old dogs with new ones, electronic style engines, I'd say treat the old dogs and leave the good fuel for the new ones, the clean fuel. So that'll help your power cells. Next, I'm going to be talking a little bit about pre-combustion chambers. But for today, I figured a half hour on here, that's enough. And what's today's date? November 30th. Yep. November 30th. Year of our Lord, 2023. Pops Howard, it's what, 10 o'clock in the morning? No, 9:17 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Now, I almost said daylight. It's not. Just remember all those things that are going through, that if you take proper care, you're going back to an era when people had these skills anyway. Cleaning off these power cells with brushes, and they had the brushes on the farm. The stainless, the bronze or brass, and not much nylon. Almost everything was metal anyway. And they knew they had to clean the thing out. They had all kinds of oils around there that they could use. Flat surfaces, well, they might even have an anvil that had part of a flat surface to it. No, it's not recommended. But they knew that most of their files were flat, tested flat. There was a lot of things that we could do in the past that were standard, normal skills that today for you are not. And that's why I'm going so specifically through this procedure. There's a lot of things you can do with a power cell. Clean them all off all the way through. And to be honest, I use a lot of sandpaper in the 120 grit area. A lot. 120s, 150s. Because I'll take the ribbon paper, strike it off on a sharp edge, put it on a sanding block. That's right, take a sanding block, cut the thing into 2 parts. 1/3 here, 2/3 there. Why? Because the 1/3 will run a 1-inch ribbon. The 2/3 will run a 2-inch ribbon. That's correct. And you can clean a lot of machine surfaces, for gaskets anyway, with that sanding block. Rubber sanding block better than you can a buzz wheel. Safer than you can a buzz wheel. It makes the difference. And a lot of it isn't so much this technique, but it's also the technical side when you combine them. So your power cells, they need that. Careful. Now one of you, before I close this out, someone's going to say, put the thing in a vise and lap it. Yeah, if you can get some clean, clear Ajax. No scrubbing particles, just pumice. Mix it with some oil and rub the two together. Oh, wait a minute, it's in the engine maybe. Yeah, it might be in the engine. I would not recommend that, because some of you are going to put a drill on there and spin it. We'll put it forward this way and then we'll put it backward that way. No. No. Why? Because you can push off kilter too easily and screw it all up. Just say no, okay? You clean one surface up here, be sure it's flat. And if it shows up flat, you're golden. Clean it all up, clean the inside up. If you can't get the thing out, leave it. Don't fight with it. Clean up what you can, put it back together, and make sure it's nice and tight, sealed properly. Yes, torque that cap, torque the T-bar. Makes a difference. All right, well, I took it off with this force. Yeah, was it rusty when you took it off? Because that's not the same force going on. Read the book. Call your dealer. Dealer doesn't know squat. Nope, call an old shop. Go online. Gen Sales, farmmanuals.com, e-manuals. You can get a manual PDF download here, relatively inexpensive. Otherwise, go to Tractor Supply dealer and get a doggone I&T manual. Gen Sales sells them online too. You can order one from them, an actual paper book. The specs are important, especially torque specs in this case. Torque specs on your injector, as well as torque specs on your power cell. And when all this stuff is clean and working right, you will have yourself a happy machine. If you're having problems with a head gasket, which a lot of these tractors did, or overheating, you may pull the head off and find cracks in there, and they pressure test it. And if the cracks aren't leaking, a lot of them are left. They stake the valve seats in place, do a quick valve job. Some don't even do a valve job. As long as everything's solid, you can pull your injector and power cells completely out, clean them all up or replace them, put them back in, and they will start better when you're done. Don't put them back in before you put the head on. Power cell you can. Don't do that with the injector. Injectors on these have to be handled with extreme care. That pintle is that important and it's that brittle. See you.